What's up, Shadow Faithful? Here with another Dimir Shadow video. So we've been doing a bunch of leagues in the last week, showing off like some Invasion of Ikoria tech in Jund, Golgari. Yeah, we had a fun video yesterday with some Obnixilis and Rakdos Scam Shadow. But this league, I wanted to go back to good old faithful with Dimir. And as you all know, I have been pretty outspoken about the fact that I think Dimir has been the most consistent shadow build for me. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the highest power level shadow deck or the most forgiving by any means, but it has been the one that I think is able to answer most everything as long as you play smart. So, for example, you don't have a lot of ways to deal with the turn one Ragavan. So, post board against Ragavan decks, you do know that's something to anticipate. You have to be smart about your play draw decisions, and especially like when you're deploying threats, what your opponent might be able to do to stop them, or if they're able to get across the finish line. So, the piece of tech that I wanted to try out this league is our little 15 mana 7/7 friend, Shadow of Mortality. So if you don't know, this card from Streets of New Capenna, it's 13 colorless and 2 black for a 7/7. If your life total is less than your starting life total, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the difference. So if you're at 10 life, then Shadow of Mortality costs 10 less. So it's now 3 colorless and 2 black for a 7/7. 7 mana is the bottoming out point once or 7 life's the bottoming out point. Once you get to 7 life, it's 2 black for a 7/7. Pretty good rate. Shadow at that point is 1 black for a 6/6. So very similar. The downside is Shadow you can play out as a 2/2 at 11 life or a 4/4 at 9. But Shadow of Mortality being like a 5 mana 7/7 at 10 life, not a very good rate. The plus is it does dodge things like Unholy Heat with Delirium, Prismatic Ending, dodges like Double Bolt. It does enable Stubborn Denial very well, and hopefully just provides like a little extra pop in the games that we're not able to find Shadows or Murktide. Just get us up to like that double-digit threat count. So I'll talk about some of the changes I've made to this list after the league, but I just wanted to showcase like some of the initial thoughts here. My biggest concerns are when I play Shadow of Mortality, or I know Shadow of Mortality is in my deck, I'm going to have to be more all in on the life loss early and really trying to like drive the life total down in case I draw a Shadow of Mortality, where normally with Shadow decks, I'm a lot more passive about, hey, let me take it slow the first couple turns and then look for an opportunity to kind of turn the corner. But with Shadow of Mortality, you really can't get down like a small Shadow of Mortality and then turn the corner after it's resolved. You really have to get your life total down low before it's even hit the battlefield. So some of the other, or I think I cut the second Archmage's Charm, and the third spot was like the third Archmage's Charm or the first Brazen Borrower. Those are the flexes that I cut for the Shadow of Mortalities. Other than that, sideboard, exact same I've been playing. Main deck, the other 58 cards in the main are the same. Just testing minor little changes here. But before we get started, as always, if you're enjoying the content, feel free to drop a subscription on YouTube. Doesn't cost you anything. Just lets you know whenever new videos get posted. We'll have a link down below to the deck list as well as the Twitch channel if you're wanting to come check out any of the live streams. Or we'll have a link as well to the Discord if you want to join the Control Freak Discord, ask questions about not only this variant of Death Shadow, other variants as well, or any other deck in Modern. But Death Shadow is definitely our forte. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it. See what we got. See what we got, like this isn't already recorded and we're doing the fun voiceover. All right, so round number one. Opening hand, we're on the draw, but we do have like a fatal push in case our opponent's got a Ragavan opener. We see they revealed Giganta, so the initial suspects are like Fair Breach, the Underworld Breach Grinding Station combo variant, Grixis Shadow, Tron, something like that. And at least 3 of those are likely to be a Ragavan deck. Prowess could also be in there. So I think the Fatal Push opener is fairly reasonable. See a Soulscar Mage. So I could lead off on the Fatal Push here, but if my opponent like throws a bunch of cards into this Soulscar Mage and attacks me, that gets me closer to Shadow anyway. And since I've picked up this second land, I might be able to like land a Shadow, hold up Stubborn Denial. So I really want to Thoughtseize to take away that second threat since I only have 1 removal spell. So I'm really hoping my opponent just goes in on like this double mutagenic growth here for the damage. Except them top decking a Swift Spear makes that a lot more damage than I was really comfortable taking. So this is going to be a 10 ball to put me down to 6. But I do get Shadow down. I know their last card is a Scalding Tarn. So I'm fetching and shocking to play out this Shadow. Mainly because I know if they top deck a non-creature spell, I'm not dead because I've got Stubborn Denial, unless it's a Lava Dart. But any other non-creature spell, I'm not dead. I counter it. I take 2, go to 1, block a creature, and then I get to Fatal Push the other one, hold up Stub, and hopefully, like, they miss 1 draw step. If they hit a creature, then I can Fatal Push one of the creatures, block 1, take 2, untap, drown and lock a creature, and like I'm still kind of set. So here, my opponent played a Mountain and Pass, so I know that their last card is still Scalding Tarn. I could fire off the Fatal Push into turn there, but I really want to like drown in the lock to be mana efficient, because if I Fatal Push there and then untap and attack, then I run into this awkward situation where I've got to drown if I need to deal with a threat on board, so I can't like drown plus Stub. So I'm really more interested in having them use up 1 more turn to let me, or having them brick 1 more turn to allow me to be mana efficient. And that's kind of what happens. They hit this Bloodstained Mire. I know, again, their last card is Scalding Tarn. So now I get to just clear the way for Shadow. Got a Stub and Fatal Push, so I can deal with the creature. I can deal with the non-creature. They haven't added Giganta to their hand, so we're just going to take game number 1 and go to the board. Sideboarding against these Prowess decks. Street Wraith is like an automatic 4-of cut for me against anything hyper-aggressive in red. So like Prowess, Burn, sometimes Zoo, kind of depends on how I'm feeling. Any like Goblins or the mono red Koldatha decks, anything like that. Thoughtseize is usually my next closest cut. I have brought in Chalice of the Void before, but it's kind of hit or miss. Chalice on 1 can do a ton to still slow them down. It's a lot better on the play than the draw, but it can be reasonable. Usually end up trimming like a Murktide because I really don't want multiples. Like the game's going too fast. I need to interact too frequently. Having a bunch of Murktides in hand is just completely dead. But I am boarding in like Fluster Storms. I've got an extra Fatal Push and a Shieldred's Edict in the board. Those are definitely coming in. You could board in Dress Down if you're really wanting to fight over like Prowess triggers, like Dress Down on your own instep. Stop your opponent's creatures from getting Prowess on their turn. I think it's like fine to have the 1 Dress Down in, but I don't really like having the extras. And then EE and Unlicensed Hearse. Hearse mostly to fight over like Underworld Breach and Path of Peril. Then EE just because they have so many 1-drops. Go ahead and Fatal Push the Channeler because I don't want them having Surveil triggers if I can stop it. Dismember is a really good pickup. They're just going to add Giganta to their hand. So I have to assume that like their hand is not that good if they're just adding Giganta here. All right, so Thoughtseize sees Channeler, Iteration, Lava Dart, Giganta, Path to Exile. Well, I want to protect my threats, so Path to Exile is a pretty good take. I could try to just like Windmill Slam a Shadow here, but I think it's a little bit better for me if I try to wait, like Counterspell this Expressive Iteration. Then I know they'll have a Channeler, but I've got a Murktide that's going to be a 7/7 at least. So here's Murktide. Channeler has to attack into it. Breach is unfortunately a very good top deck out of them that I have to respect because they can just Path to Exile my Murktide. And last unknown card is a Lightning Bolt off the top. So that's really rough. That does let them trade with my Murktide. But at the end of the day, like trading with my Murktide and leaving them with just Giganta in hand isn't too bad. I'll probably get questioned about the EE on 2 here. So the 2 cards that I think mess me up the most here are Sprite Dragon and Underworld Breach. Like all the 1-drops I can stand in the way of without too much hassle. But Sprite Dragon and Underworld Breach are both really, really rough. So I kind of want to be mana efficient, just get the EE down. And if they do end up like top decking a Sprite Dragon and Lava Darting me, I can kill it. If they don't, if they eventually hit an Underworld Breach, hopefully I can set up like blow up Breach in response to something. It's not great because they can still respond with like more bolts, but maybe if they have this 1 bolt in the yard, they put it on the stack with Breach, I can respond by blowing up EE and they can't bolt again. All right, so I know their last card is Giganta, so pretty aggressive swinging in with Shadow. They play second Swift Spear. I'm not dead to the Lava Dart in the yard. I know they only have 1 dart. So depending on their attacks, they could just be dead here. So they're going to Lava Dart me down to 6. They can't kill me. And because they put me down to an even number with Dismember, I can actually pay down to 2 life, kill off the Swift Spear, and have an exactly lethal Shadow back. If they hit me to an odd number, I could just pay more life, but you get the idea. So on to round number 2. Pretty good opener. Fatal Push, Drown, Consider. Ooh. Back-to-back Prowess into Burn. So I know this is a matchup that a lot of people really enjoy seeing because it's like this crazy back and forth. Who's trying to be proactive? Who's trying to be a little more reactive? Roiling Vortex, not a card I've expected. Apparently, a bunch of Burn players are cutting Eidolon of the Great Revel for Roiling Vortex. I guess, sure. Like, it's better against pitch elementals for sure. But I think in a situation against the card Death Shadow, it looks a lot more awkward. I really don't want to like force my life total down. I kind of want to let this Roiling Vortex do a little bit of work, get me where I want to be, and then let me hold up a bunch of interactive spells. And then when your opponent plays a fetch land and passes, there's such a good chance that they're looking for an opportunity to Searing Blaze. So why not give them that opportunity? I've got 4 counter spells rolled up. Searing Blaze helps speed up my clock. I definitely don't want to let them kill my Shadow. Stubborn Denial so that I can hold Drown and Lock up to maybe kill a threat if I need to. And now we're just going to spend the rest of the game holding up double counter spells. And hopefully that should be enough to get us across. 2 spells. We can counter 2 things. I could get kind of cheeky and try to like fetch and shock and make it a 1 turn less clock. But nah. We'll just sit on our counter spells. Be just fine. Sideboarding against Burn. Basically the same as Prowess. The street wraiths coming out, usually trimming on like Dismember or Thoughtseize. The only difference really is I'm not bringing in E or Unlicensed Hearse. Bringing in Turok instead, though. Turok, like when your opponent... Alright, I know I've done a video about this Shadow versus Burn matchup before. And it's a real back and forth on skill level. Like, the best way I can describe it is the better each side gets, it takes like a big swing one way or the other. So like if you have an okay Shadow and an okay Burn player, I usually say that it edges on the side of the Burn player. And then as like the Shadow player gets better, it goes to the Shadow side pretty heavily. And as the Burn player gets better, it goes back to the Burn player. And if you have two people that are like really, really on their A game, then I think Burn is favored, but it can come down to play style. A lot of the Burn players really take that that plan of, hey, I'm going to play really, really reactively and then try to like flurry Burn spells towards the end. And something like Turok can actually really do a good job of messing up that plan. So if you're looking for an extra spot to bring in, Turok might be the answer for you. Opening hand, Fatal Push, Counterspell, Fluster Storm, some lands. About all I can ask for. Stub off the top. Suspended Rift Bolt. So this is that time I'll actually take the chance to fight over Prowess triggers by dress downing on my end step to shut down this Swift Spear. Like, I'm pretty confident that I'm not making it out of this one. But if I do get to untap with like this Murktide, maybe there's a chance. I really need like one more threat though. Or Removal Spell. Removal Spell's good. Deflecting Palm, always a fun one. I see so many Burn players boarding in Deflecting Palm, and I think it's like okay if you're on Jund Shadow. I would never board it in against a blue-based version of Shadow, because it is very, very easy to play around and doesn't really provide like that much upside. Yeah, so just one too many creatures than we could deal with. I was really hoping that they respected Fatal Push and just didn't make the attack. But they did not. For most Shadow variants, like the creature heavy hands are the toughest for us to deal with. Mulligan decision there. I think it was like 6 lands, so yeah, pretty easy decision to mulligan that one. This hand, we finally get to see Shadow of Mortality, so this could be a good matchup for it, for our opponents knocking us down pretty aggressively. Fetching with Goblin Guide, there's a few little like minor tips and tricks you can use. So, for example, if you're playing a Mishra's Bauble variant, you can see the top card to see if you want to fetch before a Goblin Guide trigger. Maybe you see something you don't want, you want to fetch it away because at least you get a chance of getting a land. In a case like this, I'm using the Goblin Guide sort of as a scry. Like, hey, it saw something on top that I don't really want, so I'll shuffle it away after. Another Goblin Guide. I could have countered this, but I really wanted it to get me down low enough to get these shadows online. And it's kind of a feel and intuition thing. But when your opponent just plays Goblin Guide straight up instead of like playing a second land and then Goblin Guide, it kind of gives that impression that they don't have a second land. So if they're just going to play out 2 Goblin Guides here and no second land, then I'll play out my shadows. If they want to bolt a shadow, that's pretty okay with me. And then I don't think opponent understood the math of how shadow works there. Like the shadows living through that attack. And even if they didn't live, I don't know if that's really a great attack to be making. So this is match number 3 on the play. Double Thoughtseize, double Consider. So we got a good number of ways to find our second land drop. We're up against some sort of creativity build. See all the mountains, Fable, Fire and Ice, Teferi. All pretty telltale signs. So I assume they're going to go for... I thought they were going to go for a Fire and Ice there on my upkeep, but they didn't. So instead, I just get like my extra land drop for free. Ready to fight over Fable of the Mirror Breaker. And now we're pretty safe to get this shadow down, because if they do have Fire and Ice to kill our shadow, then, or not Fire and Ice to tap down a land, then we can still use one of our 1-drop interactions, the Dismember the Push, to kill the token before creativity. Unfortunately, Leyline Binding kind of messes that up, so we're just really hoping that they go for Fable here. If they have a creativity, yeah, kind of sucks, but it's one of those situations of you just can't beat everything. So if your opponent just blind rips like Leyline Binding and creativity, just chalk it up. Like, you have to play with the information that you know. So first hand was a bad 7. Second hand's got Thoughtseize and Shadow, so automatically that's got to be better, right? Sideboarding against creativity, bringing in like Flusterstorm, Engineered Explosives. Sometimes I'll bring in Unlicensed Hearse if they're like a persist heavy build like Jund. I don't like Dress Down, mainly because I think if you're fighting over the Archon trigger, then you're already losing, because we don't have many ways of getting Archon off the board. So stopping like 1 ETB trigger is usually cool. They just get to untap and attack with it, and you're not in any better position. So I'd rather fight over the Archon getting onto the battlefield in the first place. And Spreading Seas I'm bringing in, because Spreading Seas is really good for disrupting mana. Puts off Dwarven Mind from being active. Can shut off like Wrenn and 6 on turn 2. Teferi on turn 3 if you are smart about what you're hitting. But either way, here's a Shadow. Shadow doesn't die to Lightning Bolt, so that's a big plus. Get to hit our opponent for 7 in the face. And play our good friend Shadow of Mortality here. So presenting lethal and picking up a Drown in the Lock's pretty nice. Unfortunately, we do have to let them tap down the Shadow because we can't Drown in the Lock that Fire and Ice. But if they have like another Bolt here, or if they go for Dwarven Mind Creativity, we can kill the token, have lethal. We could counter the Indomitable Creativity, but killing the token is like so much more satisfying. But on to game 3. Opening hand is like a little clunky, but we do have Engineered Explosives. We've got Consider to help kind of draw out of it. We've got a threat. Drown in the Lock can be a removal spell. Or not a removal spell, a counter spell. Wrenn and 6, unfortunately, is like one of the best ways for them on the play to beat Drown in the Lock, which unfortunately is a really good card for us, so Can't really go about cutting it. All right, so Bolt and Archon. So they did have a binding, but the rest of their hand is very, very mediocre. So if we can land a Murktide here or a Murktide and a Shadow, then we might be able to just like sneak away with it. Didn't fire off the Shadow because a Ren down tick plus a Bolt would kill off the Shadow. Them having Leyline binding off the top is rough. In a perfect world, Leyline binding wouldn't be that big of a deal because, hey, they have Leyline binding. We have Stubborn Denial. They're both 1 mana instant speed interactive pieces for each other. Leyline binding, 1 white, exile our threat. Stub, 1 white or 1 blue, counter their Leyline binding. But in reality, Leyline binding being live against everything makes it so much better than Stubborn Denial, because there's so many times that Stubborn Denial is going to be dead and we just can't afford to run like 4 of them. But Leyline binding, always going to be live. All right, so I could have gone to my turn and popped the EE like before I attacked or something, but I really want to be mana efficient here. So I go ahead and pop the EE so that I'm able to attack the Ren, drown in the lock the token, and just kind of hope that they don't have anything to stop that. Obviously, if they have an interactive piece, like I can't beat it, but I can't beat a Ren ultimate. And Spreading Seas the Jetmir Garden so that we shut them off of white for potential future Leyline bindings. And Flusterstorm and Counterspell, 2 very, very good pickups here. Most creativity decks are only on 3 Dwarven Mines, so like as soon as you get the 3rd one out of the way, you kind of stop caring about lands, and now you get to worry more about the spells. Could main phase a Consider, but I don't think that's where I want to be. I think I'd need this Consider to find what I needed to find when I needed to find it. Could try to Flusterstorm and like tap them out. I know they have a Lightning Bolt, so I really don't want to go down to 3 if I can avoid it. But go to my turn and they scoop. So yeah, that was like ridiculous roller coaster of a match, going from, oh, they top decked the Leyline binding, they wrecked our whole plans with Murktide, to getting there with a Shadow and a hope and prayer drown in the lock on a token to knock down that Ren. On the draw, a couple Wraiths, Fatal Push. Pretty good hand on the draw. Turn 1, Forest Crashing Footfalls. Finding second land is phenomenal. Thoughtseize to take a Shardless Agent's really good. So now we're expecting Fire and Ice on our land. But because we've got Consider instead of Tainted Indulgence, we can get some value out of it right there. All right, so I play out the Shadow without the Street Wraith, because if my opponent top decks something like Fury red card, I want them to evoke that Fury thing and they'll kill the Shadow and I get to get them with Street Wraith. It's just like kind of free to do. I don't have any mana available, so there's not really a big incentive to holding it up. Opponent takes 6, so we'll get down Murktide unless they have one of their main deck. So I cannot wrap my head around Rhinos with main deck Mystical Dispute. I know it's stock. I know it's been normal for a while. It's just so crazy for me to think about. So Consider, Shadow gets dead and gone. That is A-okay. I could sit here and like hold up Drown in the Lock for their Footfalls coming off suspend, But at the end of the day, like, I don't really care about these two Rhinos. As long as I can interact, I'm pretty set. Shadow of Mortality is a decent top deck. So yeah, like, I know that they're going to have to block at least one of these shadows. If they double block like this, then I could either Fatal Push, or I could just eat both of the shadows, or eat both of the Rhinos and play Shadow of Mortality. Like, either way is fine. Am dead to double fire there, but I've already played one, so I feel like the chances are pretty low they top deck two more. Sideboarding against Creativity. Flusterstorm's definitely coming in. EE, Chalice of the Void coming in. Boarding out some amount of spot removal like Fatal Push and Dismember. Mainly, I want my heavy lifting to be done by the sweeper effects, the EEs, Path of Peril, stuff like that. Thoughtseize, Sea Violent Outburst, that's their only Cascade spell. They do have Fire and Ice, Mystical Dispute, Force Negation, Murktide, so like fairly reactive hand. Luckily, the Mystical Dispute and the Force of Negation do not stop a turn 2 shadow from coming down, so that's pretty good for us. Again, holding back Street Wraith in case my opponent's got like a Fury there. I do think it's really nice to pull ahead in these games where, like, we're flooding out horribly. But because we just have these kind of chunky, beefy threats that our opponent can't deal with very well, then that's going to kind of work to get us towards the finish line. So they forced our Stubborn Denial, which is fine because I know, like, the only thing they have in hand is either Murktide or Rhinos if they top deck one. Either way, it's on chump block duty. So get across the finish line. On to match number 5. We are 4-0 right now. 4-0 with a nice little mold to 5 on the play. And we see, so I should have mentioned, it's hard to see, but there's a little 7 up there on the exile cards. My opponent did Serum Powder their opening hand. So we know we're up against like some sort of colorless Tron variant, which is a lot of the reason for those first 2 moles. Let's go back and look at those. All right, so we'd look at our opening hand. First one, yeah, first one on the play. We can't get Shadow online yet. We've got double Stubborn Denial and Drown, which are all like situationally reactive cards. So that's like a fine mulligan on itself. Our opponent's Serum Powders here. So we know we're up against the Tron variant. So I see this hand against the Tron variant, and it's pretty dead. Like, we don't know if Drown in the Lock's going to be live. We don't know how good Counterspell will be. So let's just go down to 5. That's why we keep this 5 of Thoughtseize, Wraith, couple lands. Take an Inscribed Tablet. They do have 2 Tron lands, this double Bauble, another Serum Powder. But we're going to take the way they have of finding a 3rd land. And maybe if we're lucky, we can find a threat. Spellskite's fine. Life total doesn't really matter here. Murktide's got power and toughness, so we're definitely keeping that. Second Murktide, a little bit less exciting, but and they find Tron land for Karn and Bridge. We have no main deck out to Bridge except for Otawara, so we need Otawara and another land. And by that point, they'll be able to Karn for something else. So I'm just going to scoop it up, go to game 2. Sideboarding against Tron. Turok's coming in. Flusterstorm usually will come in against the green variants. I think I did, I didn't bring it in against the colorless variant because they're not playing like Ancient Stirring, Sylvan Scrying. Turok, however, really, really good at nuking a hand after the first few turns. But otherwise, this hand is just like Fetch Shock Thoughtseize on 1, Fetch Shock Shadow on 2, hopefully find another way to lower my life total, and counterspell from there. So we're just going to play out Turok because they've got the Walking Ballista, and I don't want them killing my Shadow. In best case scenario would be find a third land. Perfect. So now we get down Shadow, hold up Counterspell. Maybe we get to Counterspell something here, and then like Murktide. Nope. Just Counterspell. But we are going to play a 4/4 Murktide, because if we find one more way to lower our life total, then that could be game next turn. I could counter the Karn, but we saw with the Serum powder that they exiled an Ensnaring Bridge. So they have bridges in their main. So I wanted to let the Karn resolve, make them spend their mana going to get a bridge and playing it, and then just like attack down the Karn instead of countering the Karn and risking them having another Ensnaring Bridge in hand. So we do get to counter this bridge, untap, hit them for 7. Unfortunately, we don't have another shock land, so we can't kill them there. But we do get to just knock down the Karn, pass a turn. These Mystic Forges don't matter. Like, I think people make the mistake of seeing something like Mystic Forge there and countering it because they're like, oh, that could be a big form of card advantage that gets them out. Ultimately, they got to spend the mana on whatever they see off the Mystic Forge. They don't get to, like, play the stuff for free. So I think just letting the Mystic Forge resolve, seeing what happens is fine. Save your counter spells. Oh, I did bring in Spreading Seas, too. Forgot to mention that one. So, Map Bobble. Okay. Got a little Thoughtseize action. I think it was just like Ensnaring Bridge and nothing else relevant, right? Double check. Yeah, Ensnaring Bridge, Spellskite, and Mycosynth Gardens. So they top deck and Urza's Saga. Pretty good. Now they've got Tron, also pretty good. Or they've just got some constructs. I just want to be mana efficient with this Drown. Like, I knew I had Shadow of Mortality plus Stub rolled up next turn, so I really just wanted to, like, use my mana. Alright, so they get a couple constructs and a Basilisk Collar. Not one I was expecting. Basilisk Collar, nowhere on my radar. But the bright side is they don't have Tron yet, and they can't search it out this turn, so they gotta wait till next turn to have Tron. Spreading Seas, really solid pickup. So I could do something like Spreading Seas a tower, attack in, play a shadow, something like that. But I wouldn't have Stubborn Denial up instead unless I shock. And I did very, very much punt here because I completely forgot about the Mycosynth Gardens. So they have lethal here if they play Mycosynth Gardens and just copy an artifact and attack him with both. The downside is if I have a way of interacting, then they just die on the backswing. So instead, they strap up Basilisk Collar and pass. And that kind of like gives me the idea of, okay, I need to get something done right now. I need to find like a drown in the lock to kill the construct, or a dress down would be lethal. All right, drown in the lock. Perfect. So we kill the construct with the toque or with the collar, attack in, force a chump block. Now we've got counterspell and stub held up with 3 cards in hand. Card number 1, power plant. Card number 2, Karn. Again, just like game 2, I can counter the Karn, but if they have an ensnaring bridge in hand, I just lose the game on the spot. Now, obviously, they could go get ensnaring bridge with Karn and have mana left over for another ensnaring bridge, and that would suck. So I probably should just counter the Karn, but I'm kind of hoping that whatever they get off the Karn just doesn't matter. But instead they get a Serum powder and strap it up with a Basilisk collar. Definitely countering the Inscribed tablet because I need to use my mana. But now we've got a Serum powder with a Basilisk collar. So if I attack with both, they block the shadow, kill it, gain 3, go to 9, take 7 off of the Shadow of Mortality, and have Karn for like bridge or something next turn. But what we can do is shut them off of Tron, see what happens. Maybe we draw like another Drown in the Lock or something crazy like that. Or we just draw a Hercules Recall. So I can say in what I think is a first in the history of modern Magic that we trophied, obviously not the first part, we trophied by Hercules recalling to bounce our opponent's Serum powder strapped up with a Basilisk collar to allow us to attack through for lethal with our Death Shadow and Shadow of Mortality. So I think I posted a screenshot of it on Twitter, but if you needed the full story, that was it. That was us trophying with a Hercules recall on a Serum powder strapped up with a Basilisk collar, as Richard Garfield intended. So let's talk about a couple thoughts here. So Shadow of Mortality was pretty solid, just as like another body. I do kind of think it's in that slot of, hey, this could be just about anything with power and toughness, and it would have been fine. Because at the end of the day, it is like a 15 mana vanilla 7/7. So it's kind of how good is that to you? Archmage's Charm, I don't think came up at all, so I might actually end up just like cutting the 3rd charm, finding something for that spot. And one thing I do want to change up for the next couple leagues is running 1 more shock land. So we've got the 4 Watery Grave, but I think with Shadow of Mortality really needing me to get down to 7 life or less, I'd like to see 1 less either island or fiery islet and add in like a steam vents or something. Foreshadowing, I've got another league where I play with the steam vents. And in the very first match, I got post board against the creature deck and got up to 6 mana with a steam vents on the field and a Path of Peril in my hand. And my opponent had a 3 power or a 3 CMC creature. So if I could have just had that steam vents be a Hallowed Fountain, I could have cleaved Path of Peril. So yeah, if you're running the extra shock land, or if I'm going to try out this extra shock land, it needs to be specifically Hallowed Fountain for no reason other than Path of Peril in the sideboard. And then EE if you want to get extra EE, but we're not really playing it for EE. But I want to cut one of the blue producing lands, the island or the fiery islet, so we're not cutting on black sources for like Turok. Other than that, yeah, Shadow Immortality was reasonable. Definitely going to be trying it out again just to see what happens. Some people have suggested Scourge of the Skyclaves, and I think that leaves a lot to be desired. So Scourge not only nombos with Dress Down, which is like a phenomenal card in the deck to begin with, but it requires you to get that first hit in if your opponent's not lowering their own life total. We can't afford to have threats that are reliant on another threat living and doing its job to be online. So I would not recommend Scourge of the Skyclaves, but if you're running to run like, I don't know, Cassiger, go crazy. It's not going to be what you want it to be because it dies to Unholy Heat, but who am I to stop you? But other than that, yeah, hope you all enjoyed the video. Enjoy the content. As always, if you want to come check out a live stream, links down below. Otherwise, hope you all have an awesome rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.